Welcome back to the BoshNRoll channel. Today I'm doing my video tournament report of the NYSE Open 10, which happened last weekend on Long Island, New York. I finished top 8 of that tournament and won a Mox Emerald because everyone who made top 8 got Power 9. That is the magic of the NYSE Open, and feels good. Come home with another piece of power, another summer, another trip to Long Island, another piece of power in the binder. Unfortunately, we have been told this is going to be the last NYSE Open, at least as we understand it, because Power 9 have outstripped the event's ability to pay for the prizes, basically. Like, power keeps going up, but people aren't getting richer. In fact, it's the opposite, the way things are going in the world and where money is moving. It is not into the hands of your average Magic player. And Nick, the TO, has said that if it's not Power 9 prizes, then it's not NYSE. If he does something else in the future, something a little smaller scale, which is possible, perhaps even likely, I don't know anything, but I think he likes the community too much to put it down entirely. It won't be called NYSE anymore because it won't be offering Power 9 prizes. As for me personally, I played Simic Oath of Druids combo in this tournament, and I'll go over my deck and the reasons for playing it, and then I'll go round by round through the matches and talk about how those went as well. This wall of text here, I don't expect you to be able to read it. This is what I sent to my Patreon Thursday before the event, and basically what this says is I have low confidence in Vintage. The flow state has shaken things up in a way that I know that I don't have the best flow state deck, and I don't know who does have the best flow state deck. And not only do I know I don't have the best flow state deck, but flow state has put my backup safety deck, which is Dimir Luris, in trouble because a good flow state deck probably has some sort of powerful combo kill, but can also keep up with the steady card advantage of what used to be the Dimir Luris decks. Like, they had 7 forces in their deck, and then Psychic Frog and Luris to recoup those cards eventually, and given infinite time, every turn of the game, they become more likely to win it, because they have inevitability over basically everyone. And a good flow state deck, that's simply not true, because those decks will have flow state, they'll have stock up, and they'll have Lorien revealed, which will turn on the flow state early, and they'll eventually get to 5 mana and then just start casting Lorien revealed. And when the combo deck has better card advantage going along than the control deck, that's bad news for the control deck. So I was basically completely legs cut out from under me here. I knew I didn't have a flow state deck I liked, and I knew my backup choice was not going to be a good one. And over the next week or so on the channel, you'll see 2 different Esper Luris leagues. One where I'm very excited because the league was going pretty well. And then I played a league off camera where it went terribly. Then I recorded a second league where I was also extremely unimpressed. And I'm glad I played 3 leagues and not just one, because I would have been ready to go on Esper Luris the first time. But with a little more reps, I realized they just couldn't keep up with the flow state decks. And I don't think they're particularly good flow state decks themselves, which puts them in kind of a weird spot. And I decided that if I'm not in love with anything and my safe backup choice is no longer safe, I am just gonna play a non-flow state deck that has a puncher's chance in any matchup. Shoving Attracts into play is pretty good. Play an Oath. I started with this list, which comes from my Patreon subscriber and coaching client, John, who had been pretty much locked on Oath for months leading up to this event. Like, he was just dialing in his list and figuring out his plans and stuff while I was trying to figure out what deck I was even going to play. And talking to him every month, even though I'm the coach, I also got to learn a bit because he was like, oh yeah, I actually feel good enough in this matchup where I don't feel like I even need this sort of sideboard card. And we chatted a bit, and it kept my fire burning slowly for Oath in the background of all the other stuff I was trying. Importantly, what John's list is doing is he has Tinker in it. Tinker on Bolas's Citadel. This is technology that was part of the deck 2 years ago. I won NYSE, and I top 8 at Eternal Weekend in the same year with Tinker Oath. And what happened was stock up was printed. And that gives you so much redundancy on the reliable Oath things that you don't really need a backup bullet like Tinker. But not needing it doesn't mean you can't play it. And John was saying that having this way to just dunk on the faster combo decks or fully pivot, grab something like a Sphinx or a Portal to Phyrexia in the fair matchups where Oath isn't as reliable, it was still worth doing, even though we don't have to do it anymore as a deck. The other thing that was being tried was Raph and Mikey Troublemakers as a one of. Only 3 Atraxas in this build, because Raph and Mikey, if you assume it will work, it'll be a 7/7 Trample Haste plus Atraxa, because it's the only card you could flip. When this card attacks, you reveal cards until you hit a creature, put it into play tapped and attacking. And the upside is you just get Atraxa plus an extra body 1/4 of the time. The downside is Swords to Plowshares, Karakas, Chain of Vapor. There's a bunch of things that could make it so your Oath or your Show and Tell don't do anything. You put in this creature, you try to move to combat, your opponent removes the creature, and you have blown your load for no gain. So the things on my radar were Tinker and Raph and Mikey. And while we're talking about Raph and Mikey, this is my actual deck I played, and clearly there is a Raph and Mikey in my final list. And if you look very close, you'll see 2 signatures on it. And those are my friends, Raphael and Michael, who were both present in the event. And I just noticed they were standing next to each other before the event started. And I was like, you guys got to sign my Raph and Mikey, obviously. So yeah, that made me extra happy to see that card every time it popped up. I have recorded 2 leagues with slightly different versions of this Tinker Oath deck. One that you saw yesterday on the channel, one that is coming out next week. These were both testing leagues as I try to figure out how I wanted to build Oath. And things that were important to me after getting a few reps in were I wanted more than 1 Oko, which this build only has 1. I wanted Flash in the deck, which this build is not playing. It has 4 stock ups. It's down to 3 show and tell. Like, Flash is your 5th show and tell, and this deck's not even playing the first 4. Flash and Oko are both really important in Oath mirrors, which I also expected would come up more at NYSE because people just like Oath in paper more than they do online. And while Tinker is a huge mirror breaker, and so is Thoughtseize, losing out on Flash and Oko was kind of a bummer. I also found that when I was playing other decks, my various Demir and Esperluris testing leagues, my opponent would just cast Oko out of an Oath deck and it would solo me. Oko is just a great card on his own. Another card I really wanted was Ancient Tomb, which does not appear in this mana base as it is constructed. But I was able to convince John before the event that this strip mine should just be Ancient Tomb. Ancient Tomb gets your show and tells, your tinkers, and your stock ups on the stack sooner. It can help push an Oath through a sphere effect. And we already have 2 Besejus to fight over stuff like Karakas. The 1 strip mine is not actually that important. I don't think it adds as much to the deck as Ancient Tomb does if we have a colorless land slot we're willing to use anyway. What I love about this deck, Thoughtseize, Demonic Tutor, and Abrupt Decay out of the sideboard. I think all these cards are great, and it would be really tough to get away from them. However, here is my final list that I ended up playing. And this is just Simic. There's no black mana. I lose the tutors automatically because I can't cast them. But losing those tutors opens up a lot of space. This build of the deck gets the flash I was looking for. I got my 4th Atraxa in here, my 2nd Oko, and room for Ancient Tomb. And really, that's what it came down to. It's not that I didn't want to play Tinker. It's that I did want to play this list of cards that I've just listed. And the slots necessary, like the Tinker, the Citadel, those take up a bunch of slots. And then in the sideboard, Sphinx of the Steelwind, Portal to Phyrexia, that's 2 more slots. So Tinker is really taking up at least 4 slots in this deck. And then I don't know if I'm playing Vamp Tutor if I don't have Tinker. I'm definitely playing Demonic if I'm a black deck, but Vampiric Tutor lends itself to resolving 1 big spell in a game because you go down a card when you cast Vampiric Tutor. You spend a card from your hand to change the top card of your deck, which you then have to spend a draw step drawing. So whatever card you're getting has to be worth multiple cards. And without Tinker and with a heavy emphasis on stock up, Vamp Tutor goes down. So Tinker is 4 slots across the 75 guaranteed, and you could argue that Vamp Tutor is potentially one of them as well. So to make room for those cards, I just went with this build, and this had also just recently won 2 challenges. I think it won 2 back-to-back challenges in the hands of a Magic Online user who I forgot to look up right now, but you could find them. Shout out to that person. 2 challenge wins. They were within a week of each other if they weren't back to back with Simic Oath, and it just had perfect mana for tropical islands, basic island, had access to Ancient Tomb. You get your Besejus. There's no messing around with when do I need my Underground Sea? Do I play a Bayou? Can I afford a colorless land at all? All of those questions answered by just not playing any of those cards. Sarah's Emissary was another card that I really wanted in the 75. This is just such a powerful sideboard card that completely ends certain matchups by itself. And with the Tinker build, Portal to Phyrexia, Sphinx of the Steel Wind, you got to support that stuff. It's got to go somewhere. That's another card that just got squeezed based on deck slots that were being used on other stuff. So I got my Sarah's Emissaries in here. From the list that was posted online, I only changed one thing. That list had 4 Force of Negation main, and I went down to 3 to get Flusterstorm into the main, because I don't really want to be Force of Negationing stock ups and flow states, which is I expected to play against a lot of, and Flusterstorm lines up great against both those cards. Flusterstorm also works on offense, where Force of Negation's not great there. This is primarily a defensive thing, and as a deck with 4 Oath, 4 Show and Tell, and Flash, being on offense with your counterspells matters a lot. And moving that Flusterstorm out of the sideboard got me a slot for Mindbreak Trap, which a faster combo is always what you're worried about as Oath. And then the online list had 4 Ravenous Trap, and I expected basically no dredge at this tournament. The NYSE deck lists have been open. They're all open on Melee now. We'll go over there in a minute as we talk through the report. But I think there was literally 1 Bazaar Baghdad player out of 80 people last year, and there wasn't many more. It might have been 1 or 2 the year before. And I didn't think I needed 4 Ravenous Traps. I wasn't even sure I needed 3. I wasn't sure I needed any, but I did want some respect for this because it can also overlap with Breach combo, which is a bad matchup. So I cut one of the Ravenous Traps for Veil of Summer, which is a card I really like because that one can push through the wall of nonsense that the flow state decks. Like if I'm trying to resolve a show and tell, and my opponent has resolved a flow state, which found a stock up, and now they're sitting there with 6 cards in their hand, show and tell with force backup, probably not going to win that fight anymore, but Veil of Summer can cut through all of it. So those are the changes I made. Just moved a sideboard card to the main to get an extra thing here, and then cut one I didn't think I needed for another one I thought would be great. And Rafa and Mikey did end up making the list on top of the 4 Atraxa because in the Simic colors, without the tutors, the demonic, the vamp, and the tinker as well, you have less control over what you specifically have access to. And if you have a show and tell but nothing to put in, it kind of stinks. Raph and Mikey just being the 5th thing you could crap out some of the time. And then also 20% of the time, you'll roll that off the Oath and you'll get an extra 14 damage. It'll cut 2 turns off the clock, and sometimes that matters, sometimes it doesn't. But Raph and Mikey in the list. And the difference between the 2 lists here on the incredible Moxfield Compare feature, one of my favorite things on moxfield.com, the 4th Atraxa and the Flash called that one out. I have Ancient Tomb. This other build doesn't. I have more mana, Soul Ring, and Lotus Petal in here as well. I get things moving faster. The Show and Tell, the Oko. I just have a higher density of bangers and more mana to cast them with versus the ability to do meaningfully different things with selecting what you have in your hand with the tutors and the tinker. Not having a brainstorm actually came up a lot. I wasn't sure when I was going to work this in, but over the entirety of the NYSE Open, I played 6 rounds of Swiss plus a top 8 round with an intentional draw in there. In the 7 rounds played, Gaia's Blessing was in my hand, I think, over 10 times. Like, I never kept a hand that it was in, and I never took it off Atraxa. It was just always like, Oath, mill my Time Walk, don't hit my Gaia's Blessing, resolve the Atraxa, put some cards on the bottom, draw for turn, there's the Gaia's Blessing. And it's like, fucking great, there's that card. And the only time it triggered to put my graveyard back into my deck, it never rolled off of Oath, not once. There was not one single Oath trigger over the entire tournament where I milled cards and one of them was Gaia's Blessing. The only time it ever happened was a turn 1 fetch land for Hedge Maze, which saw the Gaia's Blessing, and then I milled it, and it shuffled the Flooded Strand I had used to fetch the Hedge Maze away with the Gaia's Blessing back into the deck. That's the only time that ever happened. It was on the day, did not show up for me, but there were a bunch of situations where I had 2 Oaths in play and Gaia's Blessing just in my hand, where instead of going infinite, I had to slow down, which was pretty annoying. But Gaia's Blessing is totally worth it. And having 1 Brainstorm in the deck is a solution to being stuck with your Gaia's Blessing in your hand. But it also exposes you to stuff like Hull Breacher and Orcish Bowmaster that doesn't have to be good against you. But I could see maybe the Lotus Petal becoming Brainstorm if we want an out to that particular situation. And I did check in with John because he was so helpful to me, keeping my option open to play Oath and giving me the confidence to do that, that I let him know that he should turn his Strip Mine into an Ancient Tomb, and he should find Flash. Flash should find its way back into his deck. And I happened to play against John in the tournament, so when I go through the rounds, we'll look at what his final list was. Well, I've been talking for close to 20 minutes about the specifics of my list and why I chose it. I guess since we're deep diving anyway, I'll just talk about the sideboard a little bit. The sideboard is really clean. It's just kind of like these 4 cards if you need to deal with Containment Priest primarily, but there are some other creatures you might care about too. Hexing Squelcher turned out to be a creature I kind of cared about. I'll talk a lot about that card as we go through the matches, but Dismember, there's just 4 of these because you got to be Containment Priest, Flusterstorm, Mindbreak Trap. If your opponent's got spells, Flusterstorm comes in. If they got a lot of them, Mindbreak Trap comes in. Null Rod, if they're an artifact combo deck, Raker Shops, here you go. Ravenous Trap, bunch of those, graveyard stuff. Sarah's Emissary, if they're trying to kill you in combat, there you go. Veil of Summer, if they have a lot of counter spells, there you go. This is very simple. There's not a lot of nuance here. The nuance is in what you cut. And I posted in my Patreon, somebody asked me for a rough sideboard guide after the tournament, and I typed one up for them and just copied and pasted it into my Patreon. But roughly speaking, Raph and Mikey comes out against any deck that can kill it. You're fine with just the 4 Atraxes, and sometimes especially against white decks, Swords to Plowshares decks, Karakas decks, you're going to want Sarah's Emissary anyway. So keeping your monsters, you don't want 7 monsters in your deck. Cutting Raph and Mikey, making room for Sarah's Emissary happens a lot. There's packages of cards like Flusterstorm, Force Negation, Mental Misstep, Gitaxian Probe, and Vexing Bauble. There are matchups where that whole brick of cards is kind of bad, and you can turn those into relevant sideboard cards. If the matchup's not about speed, I think it's fine to cut your basic island and your Lotus Petal. If they're not going to deny your mana, island can come out like any sort of combo mirror. If your Null Rods are coming in, I think it's okay to cut Lotus Petal and Mana Crypt. It is sometimes okay to shave 1 Oath against slow decks without any creatures of their own. I also think it might be okay to shave 1 Show and Tell against decks with lots of powerful permanents of their own, where Oathing is safer because it's going to be one-sided, where Show and Tell they might have something that beats you. In the other builds of Oath, like the Sultai Oath decks, especially the ones with Tinker, I actually really like fiddling hard in tournaments over the number of enablers in my deck. Like, I will frequently present a deck in sideboard that has 1 Oath of Druids in it, where I can vamp or demonic for that if I need it, but I'm not really that interested in it. And I have the Citadel as another angle I could go. And like, especially in the Oath Mirror, you don't really want your card to put their Atraxa into play. Well, changing those numbers matters a lot. But this build doesn't really have other moves. You have to get Atraxa into play, and you have 9 cards that do it. Really 8, because Flash doesn't kick in until the super late game to actually keep your Atraxa. And I'll talk about that when I talk about my match with John, where he was on this build with all these cool extra moves, and I was on this build without any extra moves. But you can shave an Oath or a Show and Tell in some matchups where that's appropriate while you're sideboarding. And those chunks of cards, they can come out, bring in whatever the obvious sideboard card for the matchup is. Not a lot of subtlety coming in, but there is some interesting stuff about going out. Okay, well over the 20-minute mark. just talking about my deck and the selection and the choices of it, but like I think that's really interesting. And that, I mean, the difference between ending up here and ending up here was painstaking. And I also think this deck is good. This build is good. So like it's not even like this John is wrong here or anyone who selected this deck was wrong. This is just for the people who like this sort of thing. I hope you enjoyed that buffet of minutia. And for the people who didn't, I am going to talk about the rounds now. Let's do that. The BoshNRoll channel is brought to you by Tales of Adventure. TOAMagic.com has almost 100,000 unique cards in stock. They offer free track shipping on every order, plus next day or 2-day options when you have an event coming up fast. They offer on-site pickup at major Magic events throughout the US, so you're never scrambling before your tournament. Stop by their booth to buy, sell, or trade at upcoming regional championships, Magic Con, Spotlight Series, and more. I love their selection of individually scanned high-end cards that show you exactly what you're buying. And the best part is saving 5% on every order with promo code BOSH. From Ancestral Recall to Zombie Master, get what you need quickly and in one place at TOAMagic.com. Eternal lives here. For the rounds, luckily we have melee.gg, which has all the information. You know, my deck's right here. My tournament path is right here. This is everyone I played against, and I can link directly to their list. Round one, I played against Brandon, who was on colorless sphere shops. I did not have access to this. The tournament was not open deck list, by the way. It wasn't until the top 8 that I could actually see my opponent's deck. I did have to figure all this out in real time. I had played against Brandon Wednesday night. Like I left for New York on Thursday, Wednesday night in kind of a last ditch off camera vibe session. Like I did play something very close to the Simic build of Oath, and Brandon was on it was Esper or Grixis Tinker deck with like Yogg-Will and just really sending it. And it had a bunch of flow states in it. And it's exactly the kind of matchup I was really scared of. And like I recognized Brandon's MTGO username when we played on Wednesday, and then seeing that I'd paired it into him in round 1 of this tournament, I was like, oh, great, here we go. Gonna be one of those days. But he had switched off of that deck. We had a little chat before. He was like, you know, we talked a little bit about our match on MTGO earlier in the week, and he was like, that's the first time I'd played that deck. I wasn't super comfortable with it. And then that was good news for me because he was on Sphere Shops, which is one of the best matchups that Oath could ever ask for. When you play Oath, you want matchups that aren't going to kill you fast, have to win with creatures, and can't really do anything about Nadraxa once it's in play. And colorless shops, or the Sphere Shops build, it is very close to all of those things being true. Raker shops being a huge part of the metagame is part of why I think Oath is on a bit of a resurgence, even though it's very poor into these flow state Tinker decks. But Sphere Shops, round 1, I've got some notes from each round on my phone. I'll do my best to recap what actually happened. In game 1, my opponent won the die roll, and I had a turn 2 Oath. It was like, you know, some lands. I think I had Force of Negation, blue card, and then Oath of Druids. And I was like, okay, we'll make it work. And opponent had turn 1 Lodestone Golem, which I can't force a negation, and now my Oath is on turn 3. So I land pass, I get crunched for 5, I'm at 15. Opponent follows up with a Stonecoil Serpent for X equals 5. Now he has 10 power on board, and the Stonecoil Serpent has protection from multicolor, which means Atraxa can't even push through it if I get it into play somehow. This is looking bad. And for my turn, I draw none other than one of the cards I insisted on playing in my build, the one of Ancient Tomb, which powers through the Lodestone Golem. I am at 12 life now, as I fetched my first land, drew the Ancient Tomb, got hit for 5. I pass at 12 life into his 10 power, and then he attacks me down to 2, and I get to my turn. I Oath out an Atraxa. Atraxa finds a Boseiju for the Stonecoil Serpent, and from there, I'm able to just grind back in from 2 life, saved by the clutch Ancient Tomb. And then game 2, I know that he's experienced with this deck, and I know he knows that Oath is a bad matchup. And he said something going to sideboarding, like, yeah, this matchup's bad, but at least I know my deck, and I know what I need to do here. And now seeing the list, 4 Grafdigger's Cage and a Caracas out of the sideboard, an extra Phyrexian Metamorph. There's one main, one board that can copy my Atraxa and keep up even if I do get one. Also a Caracas already in the main. There are a lot of tools here, especially if he has an early sphere that slows down my ability to develop. Well, my opening hand was pretty good. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I do have in my notes that I drew Gaia's Blessing on turn 1, just first draw step of the game. Here's this thing. And this is one of the matchups, especially if I'm at low life total versus multiple Stonecoil Serpents, that I might need to go through my deck more than once and find my Besejus more than once. And that was just not an option because I drew the stupid Gaia's Blessing. I was also kicking myself a little bit because the third Ravenous Trap in my list, I mentioned that I thought I could probably get away with playing close to 0 of these, but I played 3 because I was a coward. If I had cut one, Force of Vigor was the other card I would have played. And I had a Force of Vigor in my bag with me. I thought about it right up until the moment of deck selection, the morning of the tournament. And Force of Vigor would have been great in this matchup for sure, much better than Ravenous Trap. But I didn't have that, so we make do. And I successfully triggered an Oath into a face-up Caracas. Like, he had played Caracas, and uh, I I think my notes only talk about the end of the game, but I think what happened this game is he had an early Grafdigger's Cage, which I matched with, or I had turn 1 Oath. He had turn 2 Grafdigger's Cage. I had turn 3 Oko to Elk the Cage. He killed my Oko with the 2 spirits I had given him, plus the 3/3 Grafdigger's Cage, and then he may have added another Grafdigger's Cage, but I had found a Force or a Beseju for that one by that point. But he also had Caracas. So it's like I got Atraxa in briefly. It got bounced in response to its trigger. Fill up my hand, pass. And then on the next turn, I Oath into another Atraxa, which puts Show and Tell and Sarah's Emissary into my hand. So I'm able to Show and Tell in Emissary. And an interesting thing happened because Show and Tell resolved, and I flipped up my Emissary, and I immediately said land. Because normally nothing happens, and there's no information that changes between Show and Tell resolving and the creature arriving, and you have to pick something. But he had put in Phyrexian Metamorph on his Show and Tell. I knew 2 of the cards in his hand, and the third one happened to be Phyrexian Metamorph. So I called a judge and asked 2 questions. One, does the Phyrexian Metamorph declare what it's copying before or after I declare what I have protection from with Sarah's Emissary? And then my secondary question was, when I played this, I immediately said land before I realized there was a decision to make. Am I still beholden to that at this point, now that information has actually changed? And the ruling was it's active player, non-active player. So as the active player, I choose what I want Sarah's Emissary to name before my opponent chooses what Metamorph copies. And the second one was you are not beholden to naming land because the information is there is actually like something to pause and think about here. So Phyrexian Metamorph can't copy Sarah's Emissary because they come into play at the same time. It can copy Atraxa though. So what I was trying to do was name land with Sarah's Emissary, so Caracas couldn't bounce my Atraxa that was already in play. But now that my opponent has an Atraxa of their own, I name creature instead. So I'll just, whatever, Caracas can bounce my Atraxa. Hopefully Sarah's Emissary just kills my opponent in a few hits in between. And like, I can't take damage, he can't block, and we're moving on. So that happens. I name those cards. And then I don't remember if I time walked or if I passed into the next turn. It doesn't really matter. But we went to the next turn, and I declined to Oath because I've drawn the stupid Gaia's Blessing. So I'm thinking about all my sequencing of like, there's a sphere in play, and there's a Phyrexian Revoker on one of my things, and I have a Black Lotus in my hand, and I have an Oko, and I'm trying to think of what I can do and what sequence best benefits me. And I figure I'll just go to combat first and figure that out. So I'm like, go to attacks. And he's like, yeah. And then I'm like, okay, attack with both my creatures. And he's like, yeah, I take 14. And the Caracas was untapped at the time. And I don't know if he got confused and just like locked in that temporary naming land off Sarah's Emissary, but then it got changed to creature and just mentally discounted the Caracas from there, or figured I was so far off, like I'll just die. But my Caracas did not get bounced. It couldn't be blocked because it had protection from creatures. And with that big burst of an extra 7 life to play with, it was much easier to sequence my turn. So I think my opponent did forget that Caracas could be used there. But I think I was also winning anyway. It was just like an interesting thing about how our brains operate when we try to play Magic and try to keep track of all the things we need to keep track of. And there was this little breadcrumb of there was a split second where Caracas couldn't target Atraxa, but then that was quickly changed. But maybe the path in my opponent's brain did not change. I don't know. But Atraxa and Sarah's Emissary won the game from there. Round 2, I played against Lurrus Breach combo. This is one of the decks I did not want to see. They have a lot of counter magic. There's 4 Force of Will, 3 Mana Drain, 2 Flusterstorm, 2 Force Negation, 2 main deck Mindbreak Trap. They have Chain of Vapor that could bounce an Oath or bounce an Atraxa. They have their own combo with Brain Freeze and Breach that can win the game on the spot. The Gaia's Blessing gives you a little bit of resistance against just a straight up Brain Freeze kill, because if this is in your deck, they mill it over. There are things they can do, and a competent Breach player will know how to do them to kill you over top of your Gaia's Blessing trigger. But I know this is here, and I can either hope my opponent, when they go off, is doing it from such low resources that they can't make those moves, or they don't know how to do it. But I always assume competence. So I assume Gaia's Blessing is a known hurdle that they're going to try to get over, but I don't assume it's going to save me. And overall, matchup quite poor. And I've said this a million times on the channel if you watched my Oath leagues, but the reason Oath is so bad into other combo decks is that your combo puts a 7/7 into play and draws some cards, and then you actually have to attack 3 times over the next several turns, and they get to play Magic over those turns. And if you don't kill them with the first 14 damage, and they do successfully combo off, you're dead, because the other combos in the format win on the spot, and your combo just makes a big guy and draws a bunch of cards. In the game 1, I had an early Orchard Oath, and I did the miracle 20%er Raff and Mikey. I just started flipping for Oath. It hit Raff and Mikey, and this is exactly the kind of matchup where this matters the most. For exactly the thing I just said, it takes 3 turns to kill them. If you hit Raff and Mikey and deal 14 damage immediately on the turn, now it only takes 1 turn to kill them instead of 3. So this was the best hit for exactly this matchup, and I was able to push over the finish line. Even on the 1 turn I gave my opponent after hitting for 14 and filling my hand, he was still able to Time Walk, Ancestral Recall, then go to the extra turn, Underworld Breach, Time Walk, Ancestral Recall again, but couldn't quite enough going to actually finish it off. But it was still like, the door was open even after doing all that. And sideboarding against this deck is interesting because some of their stuff is artifacts. Like, they do need Black Lotus to go off with Breach. But they also have a lot of lands and other sources of mana, so until they're going off, Null Rod's not that good. They also, Breach is a graveyard combo, but they don't care about their graveyard until the Breach is killing you. And then when Breach is in play, they might be able to use a bunch of their graveyard resources in response to a Ravenous Trap. So despite having 2 Null Rods and 3 Ravenous Traps against this nominally graveyard artifact deck, I think I brought in 1 of each. I was very interested in the Flusterstorm and the Mindbreak Trap and the Veil of Summer, but I think I only brought in 1 of each of these cards. Because another thing that happens a lot when you play Oath or even the Fair Lurrus decks into these PO decks, into these Breach decks, is you keep a hand that goes all in on an early Null Rod, and then they just hit 3 or 4 land drops, start casting stock up, and you lose. And I didn't want that to happen. I wanted to keep my proactivity, and there just wasn't room to bring in 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cards here. Like, I was surprised I could get 6 cards in against them, which might mean the sideboard map is bad, or it might mean that these cards aren't meant to be brought in their full capacity in matchups like this one. but that's what I did. And game 2, I kept a slow hand on the draw. I had like Vexing Bauble into Ancestral Recall and Show and Tell, or Oath of Druids, but no protection. So my plan really was just stick the bauble, then figure out the rest. And my opponent led on Library of Alexandria, which was exciting for me. Let me see where this thing is. It's got to be in the main deck, right? Or does it come in out of the board? It does come in out of the board. Okay, I actually wondered that when he played it, because Library is not actually that good in the format right now, but it does make sense in some matchups. And Oath is a combo control deck. So he did board in the Library and he had it on turn 1. But normally, if my plan is to kind of play slow, Library is terrifying. However, Vexing Bauble, as it interacts with Library, is really interesting because my opponent probably has some number of Black Lotus, Lotus Petal, Mana Crypt, Mox Emerald, Mox Jet, Mox Pearl, Mox Ruby, Mox Sapphire in the hand. There are 8 of these cards in the deck, and normally you would just play them out. But if you have Library, you're trying to keep 7 cards in your hand. So I had a pretty good sense that my opponent was not going to dump out all his mana on turn 1, which means I would have a chance to make Vexing Bauble a real fight. And sure enough, I played Vexing Bauble on turn 1, and my opponent was basically like, son of a bitch. And then we had a little fight over it. I lost the fight, but the force of will fighting over Vexing Bauble took him out of the Library. And now you have a further decision of, do you play out your Moxen now, or do you hold them and try to get back up into the Library? And then on the next turn, I was able to Ancestral Recall, and I had access to Veil of Summer, but I don't think my opponent fought over the Ancestral. And from there, I was able to get a Raph and Mikey into play again, which did the big crush of damage. And the game ended up in a spot where my opponent was at 3 life and had a Mana Crypt in play and had 1 big turn and won the Crypt flip, didn't die immediately in the upkeep, and then had a really big breach turn, rebuilt a bunch of resources, and then basically at the very end of the chain was like, I'm 1 mana short, and scooped it up. And that was pretty terrifying, and I got away with that difficult matchup.
This video is sponsored by Moxfield.com, the easiest way to build Magic decks online. Moxfield supports over 30 formats, including Legacy and everything else you'll see on this channel. There's multiple customizations so you can interact with your deck how you want. Views such as text, grid, or stacks. And groupings like type, subtype, color, color identity, even artist. The site offers light mode, dark mode, and so much more. However you want to see your deck, Moxfield can provide it for you. Follow my Moxfield to keep up with the channel and what I'm playing in paper. I'll see you there.
Round 3, I played against Mark, who was also on Colorless Sphere Shops. Look at this deck choice paying off big. Mark, I played against in round 1 of last year's NYSE. That match was on camera, and we both ended up making top 8 of that tournament. And spoilers, we both ended up making top 8 of this tournament as well. I was Mark's only loss in the Swiss. And I recognized him from last year, and I knew that he was on Sphere Shops, and I knew his deck was like blinged out Japanese foil, and also his just general body language sitting down for the match was just like, oh fuck, here we go. Like he knew what I was on, and that gave me some confidence that he was probably still on this excellent matchup for me. And our game 1 was actually really interesting. I lost the die roll, and my hand was Ancient Tomb, Black Lotus, Mox Pearl, and then a bunch of bangers, like ways to win and stuff. And my opponent's open was Wasteland, use it to cast Vexing Bauble. So there's a Vexing Bauble in play, which locks all of my colored mana out, my Lotus, my Pearl, and the only land I have is Ancient Tomb, which only taps for colorless. And not only is Vexing Bauble in play, but it was in play cast off of a Wasteland, which if I play out the Ancient Tomb, just gets wasted, and then I have no mana at all to play the game with. And I just figured it's probably better to play my land, because it's not like it's getting better. Like, if I don't play out the Ancient Tomb, then, like, maybe he doesn't waste it. Maybe he has a spell to cast instead. And then if I draw a Tropical Island or whatever, I can shove my Show and Tell, my stock up, like whatever it was. I don't remember exactly what my banger spells were in my hand, but it gives me an out here. And so I play out Ancient Tomb, I pass. My opponent plays a second Wasteland, and then uses the 2 Wastelands to cast Sphere of Resistance, which is great because Vexing Bauble reads, when a spell was cast, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. And now the Black Lotus and the Mox Pearl in my hand cost 1. And I have Ancient Tomb that can tap to cast those 2 spells. And I get what he was going for here. Like, if he just Wastelands me, there's a chance I do nothing that game. But also, if I don't have a big turnaround on turn 2, then he can crack his own bauble, Wasteland me twice, and then I'm definitely not playing the game through the Sphere. And it was an interesting gamble on that one. Also, like, if my hand is not zeros and I have something like stock up that I want to cast on turn 2, then the Sphere actually does stop that, where wasting me just slows it down. Like, this was a sequencing decision. I'm not calling it a mistake because I didn't know his hand, but playing the Sphere into his bauble let me go Ancient Tomb, deploy Lotus, Pearl. I cast some sequence of spells, probably an Oath. I think there was an Oko involved, and then from there I got to run away with it. And really glad that worked out. And also really glad Ancient Tomb was in my deck because it cast 2 spells instead of just 1 into the Sphere. And that was actually the second time in the tournament that sequence had happened to me, because round 1 against the other Sphere Shops player, there was like turn 1, Mishra's Workshop put Vexing Bauble on the stack with 2 mana floating. It's like, well, I have to force that or else my force doesn't work. And then after I force the bauble, use the 2 floating mana to play Sphere of Resistance, which, if I had just not forced the bauble, the Sphere would have turned off the bauble. And it's just like a really weird non-bow that exists in these Prison Shop decks, that they have both Sphere of Resistance and Vexing Bauble, and also that Mishra's Workshop can cast both of them in the same turn. And it's just like kind of a weird thing that it was annoying that I had to use my force for no reason in the first case, but in this case it saved me. So, whatever, but that was nice. Got away with one that I was worried I might get flipped game 1 by Vexing Bauble. And then game 2, my hand had Force of Will, Show and Tell, Time Walk, Sapphire Orchard, Oko. And I had to Force of Will, Lodestone Golem on turn 1. I pitched Show and Tell to that. And then, like a boss, drew Oath of Druids for turn and just had the turn 1 Oath with Mox Orchard Oath. So gave him a creature. I did have a cage, but then I ripped another mana source so the Oko could unlock the cage, and then from there was able to do the thing. My opponent did play a smokestack this game. How many of those were you on? I gotta know. 2 smokestacks. Okay. Yeah, this is some surprising technology, and like, I was doing Oath loops, like threatening Gaia's Blessing to tuck the deck. It didn't come up because I found a Boseiju before I needed to go through my deck again. But it was possible for Smokestack to wither my resources down, even if I was fully off with Oath. If I was taking all the turns and sacrificing 2 permanents per turn, it might have been hard to stay ahead of that, but I found a Boseiju quickly, dealt with the Smokestack, and then that was that. A pretty clean victory against a good matchup again. And then round 4, I played against none other than Patreon subscriber John, who it was on his build of Tinker Oath, which was awful to me because Oath of Druids is frequently a crapshoot. I mentioned that Oath of Druids could put both players' Atraxas into play. Show and Tell could put both players' stuff into play. The one-sided stuff like Flash, just playing a totally different game on Oko, or in John's case, Tinkering, are the ways that you can kind of play without risk. And John's final list, only one Oko. He did make the switch to Ancient Tomb over the Strip Mine. That is here. And did find room for Flash and the fourth Atraxa. That's something we talked about because his early builds only had 3 Atraxa and no Flash. And I said that's something I think you want. I was surprised to learn Raph and Mikey was still in his deck. I didn't learn that until basically right now when I opened up this deck list. I thought cutting the Raph for the fourth Atraxa was where you found the slot for that, but there was a cut coming from somewhere else because he clearly has 5 monsters here, but still found room for the Flash and the Ancient Tomb. So game 1, he has multiple Forbidden Orchards for his lands, and he goes for a turn 1 like Mox Orchard Oath, and I force of will the Oath. So now I have a Spirit, and my hand is a bunch of counter spells, and he goes for a Show and Tell on turn 2, giving me another Spirit. I counter that, and then I probed him to see uh, another Show and Tell and an Atraxa were the relevant cards in the hand, and then I had 1 counter spell left at that point, and he drew for his turn and put Ancestral Recall on the stack, which obviously is a very annoying card to have to battle against. And I had to decide, do I want to counter this Ancestral Recall, knowing that Show and Tell is in the hand? But I also had an Atraxa in my hand. So if he shows and tells, or no, I had Raph and Mikey. Yeah, he had Atraxa, I had Raph and Mikey. If he show and tells, he gets to reload with Atraxa, but I get Raph and Mikey, which I don't think his build is particularly good at answering. And then I get an Atraxa with my Raph and Mikey on my turn, plus the spirits, and his life total is getting low. And I do ultimately decide to counter the Ancestral Recall. And then I find another counterspell for the Show and Tell, and I'm just getting in with the 3 spirits that he gave me earlier. I have no other threats. At some point, I draw a Show and Tell of my own, and I have to think really hard about what the game looks like. If I cast Show and Tell, my opponent's at a low life total. I put in Raph and Mikey. You reload on my main phase with Atraxa. I get into combat with Raph and Mikey, get my own Atraxa, get a reload for my second main phase. You probably trade your Atraxa for my Raph, and then I have to hope that the 2 hands that we've refilled favor me. And from that spot, I just think I'm okay to continue the Spirit Beatdown and not introduce this extra risk of giving him an Atraxa and a fresh card, or a fresh hand of cards. So I get in with the Spirits, and on the last turn before he's dead to the Spirits, he goes from hand land and Mox, which gives him 7 mana to hard cast Atraxa, which I'm now out of counterspells for. And the Atraxa immediately undoes all the work I've done with the spirits, and I can't really race it or keep up with it. And I think it reloaded into a counterspell, so I couldn't even force my Show and Tell and make Raph and Mikey do stuff at that point. So the hardcast Atraxa happens quite a bit in Oath, actually, especially in mirror matches. Game 2, well, so to the sideboard, and I promised I'd talk about this because I think it's really interesting. My opponent's list, I'll use Moxfield. It's close enough, and it's a better visual than Melee. My opponent's moves in the sideboard, you don't really want Oath in an Oath mirror if you can avoid it, because then it's just betting on who's going to draw more Forbidden Orchards, and it's a dead card until you have more orchards than me, and you don't want dead cards either. So he's got Tinkers that he can play as a no risk one-sided thing. He's got 1 Oko. He's got 3 Abrupt Decays that could kill my Okos. I have no way to kill an Oko. So if he only has 1, but if it comes down, it's going to be a problem. And he has a bunch of ways to pick off mine if he boarded them in. He's also got, I actually do have to go over here for this one. He's got a main deck Thoughtseize and a sideboard Thoughtseize. So 2 Thoughtseizes in the 75, which means that he has inevitability over a long game if we're both jockeying to have good hands. Because my Show and Tells, I could Gitaxian Probe and know what I'm going to have to deal with, but I can't take a card. If there's an Atraxa in his hand at any point, my Show and Tells are going to give him an Atraxa. There's nothing I can do. But he could Thoughtseize me, take my Atraxa, get a Show and Tell in, and that's a totally reasonable mid or late game strategy to play towards. His list just has so many better things to do than mine in the mirror. And I recognize this when I'm sideboarding and determine all I can do is send it. I left in all of my oaths. I think I shaved a show and tell because that one actually is worse for me than it is for him. My flash was in, my oaths were all in, my Okos were in. I brought in my Flusterstorms to push through. I think I brought in one Sarah's Emissary, just in case we ended up where we both have a creature in play. Naming protection from creatures then means that he has to find his Oko and turn off my Sarah's Emissary to actually win. If I name enchantment with Sarah's Emissary, he can't oath because it does target. And there's some stuff to do with this, but it's kind of weird. And all I could do was try to shove it and just hope that it worked out better for me than it did for him. Game two, I got this really awesome exchange. I got to Gataxian probe him early, and I saw that his hand it was pretty slow, but it had stock up in it, and not a lot else going on. I saw stock up Flusterstorm, and he had like Forbidden Orchard and Mox for mana, non-blue Mox. And my hand had Flash and Atraxa and my own Flusterstorm. So I'm like, I can at least flash out this Atraxa at some point. And then on his third turn, he finds another Mox and he taps out for stock up, where I got to do an awesome move where I cast Flash in response to stock up. And my hope here is that he's drawn Force of Will since the last time I saw his hand. And then he did. And he forced pitching Flusterstorm on my Flash. And then my Flusterstorm countered both his Force of Will and his stock up. And then my Flash resolved. And from there, it was basically over. I had a full hand and he had nothing. But that was a sick move. And then game three, I had a double Orchard, double send hand. Like it was like Oath into Show and Tell or something. Or maybe it was just double Oath. And like me with my double Orchard, he's never going to have less creatures than me. So Oath is good. We do have to fight over it. And he had a hand that was pretty strong, but it only had Orchard and Lotus for mana, where I had no defense. I was just sending and hoping he was stuck behind it. But I did probe him and see that his hand had Demonic Tutor in it, where if he had done something like Demonic Tutor for Ancestral Recall, Reload, hit Tinker, I could have lost. Or there might have been some other plays there. Like the Demonic looked really good, but he was afraid to crack his Lotus, cast the Demonic, I force it, then he has nothing and no mana. So he played kind of slow, kind of safe in a way that I'm not sure was wrong, but it did cost him the game. And I was able to take another bad matchup, or, the pseudo mirror where my opponent is better built for it, and got away with that one. I'm excited to be a special guest for the Excalibur events Niagara Falls weekend, September 25th through 27th, 2026. This event features the pre-modern scaling 25K with $10,000 guaranteed and $5,000 added to the prize pool at 275, 350, and 450 players for a total of $25,000. Gold Border and Collector's Edition cards are legal in this tournament, and you can use up to 10 playtest cards to fill out your deck. Be sure to check the FAQ on the Excalibur website to follow their playtest card policy. This has a chance of being the biggest pre-modern event ever. Sign up now and use code BOSH for $5 off entry. I hope I'll see you there. Round 5, I ran into Matt for the first time in the tournament. Spoilers, he's also my top 8 opponent who dispatched me. And this is the deck that I was worried about, hypothetically, in that Patreon post. Remember back when I said, I don't know what the best flow state deck is, but I know I don't have it. And if a team finds a good flow state deck, they're going to be heavily rewarded today. Well, this team found it. This is, I think, the deck of the tournament. It didn't end up getting first place in the tournament. Matt ended up losing in the finals to Tony Scaponi on Jewel Shops. But I think this is the thing that will resonate the hardest through the vintage metagame. Hexing Squelcher, 2 copies of this, is a huge deal, because that means that, if this resolves, your Tanker's going to resolve too, and then you're just off to the races. This also means that this combo deck gets to ignore Vexing Bauble, both their own Bauble and the opponent's Bauble. Like, Bolas' Citadel has taken a bit of a bath since the printing of Vexing Bauble, because there's just a card that every single deck plays that turns off the best Tinker target. And like that's tough to navigate. But Hexing Squelcher says your spells can't be countered, and Vexing Bauble says counter spells if no mana were paid for them. It's kind of a build your own Lavinia, where your opponent can't cast zeros, but you can. And that's super messed up to both push the Tinker through and then also ignore everything else that happens after that because of Hexing Squelcher. Super messed up. And that's inside a shell with 4 Flow State, 4 Luring Revealed, 4 Stock Up, and Demonic Tutor, Time Twister, Ancestral Recalls in here, Mystical and Vamp Tutor. This is a beautiful machine. Vault Key are in here too, Time Vault Manifold Key. You've got multiple Tinker combos. You've got relevant tech, the Hexing Squelcher, against other people's decks and in favor of your deck. Just an incredible piece of technology here. This deck is amazing, and Matt and the team deserve everything. Deserve their Mox Sapphire that was won with this deck for figuring it out. To our match, game 1, I had Oath of Druids in my hand and force blue card, or it was force stock up 1 extra blue card, probably like an ochre or something, that doesn't matter. And I cast the stock up, it resolved. And my options were to take Forbidden Orchard plus Force of Will, and then I just have Orchard Oath, Force. Or I could take Forbidden Orchard, Gataxian Probe, and then I can look at my opponent's hand, get a taste for what's going on over there, and then still have Orchard Oath with Force backup. And I get to redraw. And if the probe draws a fresh card, then and if it's blue, I just still have the same position and the full information. And I think I needed a land for something. I might have had like Flusterstorm in my hand, and if probe hits a land, then I also have another layer of protection. Maybe that was the other blue card. Sorry for the exact recall. I mean, this was a few days ago, but I was motivated to both see my opponent's hand, and I was trying to cantrip and hit a land or a blue card, which are both great. So I took the probe instead of taking the second force. And then I probed my opponent, and he had the misstep for the probe, which is super awkward because now I don't have the information. I didn't get the cantrip, and I can only protect my oath once. But then I sent the oath, and my opponent was able to counter it twice. And I ended up losing because of that, where if I probably just should have, knowing that I'm Simic Oath and my job is to send it, I probably just should have doubled up on force and tried to make Oath happen. But I didn't, and I got punished by mental misstep. Game 2, my opponent had a Hexing Squelcher, and he used it to go all in on a Tinker. And as soon as Bolas the Citadel was in play, like the first time he cast a spell with it, I had Beseiju to clip the Citadel. And then it was basically an empty-handed opponent with Hexing Squelcher in play versus my Oath deck. I think my Oath triggered off of his Squelcher, and I was able to take that one. And then game 3, he had a turn 1 Bauble, which locked my turn 1 Mox Orchard Oath Send. Like locked the Mox in my hand and didn't really have a follow-up after that. My notes say he also had Tolarian Academy, into Squelcher, and Time Twister. So he got to dump out his whole hand, and I didn't. And post Time Twister, I resolved an Oath, but he Chain of Vapored my Oath when I couldn't misstep back because he had Vexing Bauble in play. And he could ignore the Bauble and I couldn't. And the Squelcher really doing the work there. Also, the card Vexing Bauble, just terrible design. Okay, that was my first loss of the tournament, which is tough because round 5 is when you could start to draw in if you're 5-0. So that was a win in. And I was pretty sure no X2s were going to make it. So this is the other win in versus Rob on Esper Tinker. And this is kind of a similar take to the Grixis deck, except you don't have Squelcher. You have Monastery Mentor as a win con, Karn going real big over here, but this is a stock up Flow State Lorien Revealed deck with a fast Tinker combo. Again, this is not really what I wanted as Oath. I don't want to see the faster combo decks. Game 1, I stuck in early Oath, and my opponent had to use cards like Swords to Plowshares. Like, yeah, he was like plowing the spirit tokens I gave him. How many plows are in this main deck? Oh, just the one. Okay, so he had the one main deck plow, used it on a spirit token to buy a turn without Atraxa in play. I have in my notes that he spent a couple turns doing that, but the only other card I could see that would do that was Sink into Stupor, and that can only target opponent stuff. Maybe it was just the one turn and my notes are wrong. But like if you're using cards in your hand to remove a temporary resource like a spirit token I gave you when I can just tap that land again next turn, like you are slowly losing. And eventually my opponent ran out of stuff to do about that. And Atraxa came into play and got it done. Game two, we had a lot of back and forth early. I don't remember all the details, but we were both pretty low on resources at one point. And there was a turn where I had just lost a fight over an oath, but I had another oath in my hand. And the other cards in my hand were Force of Will and Ancestral Recall. And my options here are play the oath and use Force Pitching Ancestral to protect it, or I could cast Ancestral, fill up, hope there's other protection there, other blue cards, and just get the best of all worlds. I played the Ancestral. My opponent had Force of Negation for it, and then I just played the Naked Oath that I couldn't protect with only an uncastable Force of Will in my hand, and my opponent untapped and had Yogwill into Tinker and went nuts. So if I don't cast the Ancestral, I guess what does that turn look like? This might not be as bad as I thought it was at the time. Like at the time, I thought for sure I had punted, but Force of Negation could have targeted the Oath as well. And then if I fight back pitching the Ancestral, the same thing happens, like the Yogwill into Tinker. Nothing changes there. I guess the thing that I could have done different is if I lead on Oath, my opponent Force of Negations the Oath, I Ancestral in response to that, and then I try to find protection plus some other cards in my hand. I guess that's the sequence that gets me out of it. So holding Ancestral to pitch to Force was not going to be right no matter what. It's just when to cast the Ancestral. Okay, that's not as bad as I remember it being, thinking through it now. But I did end up losing that one because, again, the Oath combo is very slow, and other combos, if your shields are down, you're dead. Game 3, and my opponent has turn 1 Vexing Bauble. You love to see it. Hate that card. But I have a turn 2 Null Rod, which my opponent has to crack his own Bauble to then force my Null Rod. That worked out great for me. I got to... It was basically... It was not quite a 3-for-1 because the Bauble replaces itself, but I removed Bauble, and my opponent spent 2 cards on that. And then I had my own Vexing Bauble. It's better when I have it. Those are the rules. And my own Bauble protects my stock up, which finds Show and Tell. My Show and Tell puts in Atraxa, but my opponent puts in Bolas's Citadel. But that's okay because I have Bauble, and my opponent's deck does not have Hexing Squelcher in it. So the Citadel gets to look at the top card of your deck, make a land drop, and a couple times he shuffled his deck to look at new cards based on the information from looking at the top of the deck, but it never actually cast a spell. And then on the last turn of the game, we had a pretty cool battle where my opponent had seen my hand and knew I had Veil of Summer, but I had drawn a Flusterstorm since then, and my opponent needed to clear my Vexing Bauble out of play to turn on his Bolas's Citadel to then do stuff, and targeted me with Hurkyl's Recall, which this has never come up for me before. I'm sure, people who play a lot more green artifact decks in Vintage, I don't even know what decks normally have these two cards together, but Hurkyl's Recall does target. So Veil of Summer goes to blank the Hurkyl's Recall. My opponent flusters my Veil. I fluster back, and then I end up winning the fight, and opponent just can't get through the Vexing Bauble on the Bolas's Citadel, and I'm able to win, take away a tough matchup, because Hexing Squelcher wasn't involved. In round 7, I ID'd with Tony Scaponi, who was my teammate. There's a team portion of this event where it's just a value add. It's a great idea by Nick. The prize is just a trophy. You don't have to do anything. You just get 3 people together, and the total match points of those 3 people are added together at the end of the tournament, and that's your team score. And I was teaming. Tony was one of my teammates. IDing with him was great because A, we didn't have to play against each other, and B, 2 teammates in top 8, got to be good for the team portion. And then in my final round, the top 8, I'm back against Matt, unfortunately. I liked my matchups across some of the other top 8. So we've got Tony. I would not have liked that matchup. Matt, who I did not want to play against. Jeremy. Oh, Jeremy is a cool story as well. He actually messaged me a few weeks ago on Instagram when I had said in one of my videos that this was going to be the last NYSE Open. And Jeremy messaged me from Germany saying like, "Oh, is this going to be the last one? I should make an effort to come then." And I was like, "Yeah, event's great. I recommend it." And he did make top 4. Got to go home with a Mox, either Jet or Ruby, I think. Cool story there, but Raker Shops, I would have liked that matchup. Dan on Jeskai Luris. I don't love this matchup, but I like it a lot more than I like these Tinker decks. Dan's list is cool. The One of the things that was being explored is, does flow state replace paradoxical outcome in these Jeskai PO decks? And what Dan did was play a few of each. There's 3 flow states and 3 POs, because paradoxical outcome is how you just run away with it when the window opens, but flow state is how you grind, play small ball until the window opens. And the PO deck without flow state can have its window shut closed, and then it just can't really cast its spells. And the flow state deck can have 7 cards in hand, but if your win condition is Thundertrap Trainer, your opponents have time to figure it out. So this is a cool innovation that just has a little bit of both in there. Colorless Sphere Shops, Mark again. I would have loved to play that one. Esper Luris by my friend Raphael, who signed my Raph and Mikey. He was the one from that. I would have liked that one. And Luris Breach against Hank. Probably not a big fan of this one either. So there's actually a lot of combo in the top 8, but I think this Grixis deck is actually the worst of them. But yeah, rematch against Matt. And this was a fast, quick, old yeller behind the barn moment. My opponent has, so game 1, my keep is Force of Will, Force of Will, Force of Will, Flusterstorm, Stock Up, Mox, Orchard. So if I draw Oath, it's coming in, it's protected, it's super protected, and the Orchard is there to produce. If I draw a mana source, I could stock up and start moving cards around, do kind of the same thing, have lots of protection. I, on turn 1, did not draw a mana source or an Oath, and pass back to my opponent, who had turn 2 Hexy Squelcher, which immediately mind twists me. And turn 2, I ripped Oath off the top of my deck, played it, it got forced, and even though I have 4 counterspells in my hand, I can't fight back because of Hexy Squelcher. And then I just died on the spot there. The old Mind Twist, 2-mana Mind Twist. And then game 2, all I can do in the matchup is send it. I kept a hand that had Orchard, Mana Crypt, Oath, Force, blue card, and my opponent mulled to 6 and had double Force. And to the strength of this deck, my opponent mulled to 6, Force, pitching 2 cards, untapped with 2 cards to start turn 1, and then took relevant game actions for the entire game after that. Like the flow state finds the demonic tutor, which finds the ancestral, and off you go. It's not like we had a crazy counter war where we both went down 5 cards on turn 1 and then we looked at each other for a while. My opponent never took the foot off the gas after having the double force anyway. Didn't matter, didn't slow him down a little bit, and died very quickly in that one. And that's the end of my story. But there's another story, the team event, the team portion of the event. The top 8 here, Hank and Rafaela are on the same team. And then me and Tony are on the same team. Hank and Rafaela's third teammate finished in the top 16. Our third teammate went 3 and 4. So we actually have a lot of points to overcome. I thought we were just dead. I also found out that Matt's team was live for the trophy as well. So it was actually a 3-team race. And luckily for me, Hank and Rafaela were both eliminated in top 8 as well next to me. And Tony just kept on trucking. And it turned out that I had left already. I got on the train. I had a 2.5 hour train commute back into the city after the event. I was just ready to get moving. And I left thinking we were dead for the team event. And I got a text like an hour later saying that Tony versus Matt in the finals not only determined the tournament, but determined the team portion as well. And as we can see here, Tony won, which led to this incredible photo being taken of our team with the bartender from the Knights of Columbus, where the event was held, standing in for me. Shout out to him. So this is the team picture. And shout out to Rob for driving this trophy back to me as well. Rob lives locally to me, and he was still there. I did end up getting a trophy in addition to the Mox. Feels good. And this thing, this is heavy. Nick does not skimp on the trophies. This is large and it's heavy. So there it is. That is my recap. Excruciating detail about the deck selection, but I think that's the interesting part of this tournament. And moving forward in the format, I think these flow state tinker decks are going to be really scary. And I think that the Dimir and Esper Luris decks are in a lot of trouble. They're going to need to find a new identity or new tools to fight the combo decks that can draw just as many cards as them. How to counteract this Tinker Hexing Squelcher deck? It's probably something like Dredge that could just run it over. It's probably something like White Initiative, where Archon of Emeria and Clarion Conqueror are not cards that Hexing Squelcher turns off. That might be where the meta goes next. Or people just learn how to play against Hexing Squelcher. Like, it's so annoying that they have exactly 2 in the list, because I have these 4 dismembers in the sideboard, and in my matches against Matt, in our first round in the Swiss, I didn't know his deck. I knew nothing. I was figuring it out. Like, this was a brand new deck I'd never seen before until I was playing against it. And in game 2, I had elked a Hexing Squelcher to turn my counterspells back on with Oko. And then I did a bunch of stuff, and he didn't concede, even though I was way ahead. And then, like, I didn't expect him to, but then during sideboarding, he was like, yeah, sorry for making you play that out. I just had, if I drew the other Squelcher, I think I had a combo line. So that put in my head, there are 2 Squelchers in this list. So he gave me the info that there's 2. And I had 0 dismembers in going into game 2. And then I had to figure out how many I'm supposed to play against 2 Hexing Squelchers. Exactly 2. Because if there's 1, I just ignore it. Like, you're not going to draw that card. It doesn't exist. It can't hurt me. If there's 3, I have to respect it. I'm going to bring in at least 2 dismembers. But at 2, it's like, sometimes you're going to have this thing and I'm going to lose to it. Sometimes you're not going to have this thing and I'm going to have dismember rotting in my hand. What a pain in the ass that card is. And they built that deck so well. But it's not going to surprise people anymore. Like, maybe the Dimir Luris decks, maybe they do have a lane where they just keep something, like they keep some number of fatal pushes in, but that's really annoying because you don't want fatal push in your hand when your opponent's casting flow state, stock up, and tinker. That deck's going to be tough to overcome from normal angles of Magic the Gathering. You're going to have to send over top of them, which, as we saw, Tony Scapone did with Jewel Shops. Certainly a way to overcome a flow state stock up deck is just kill your opponent on turn 1 or 2 before they could flow state or stock up. So faster combo or actual lock pieces, probably the way to fight that. Like, I don't think this deck broke Vintage, but I do think they found a phenomenal combo shell for flow state that I was trying to find myself and didn't before this tournament. I don't think I have anything else profound to say here, and this video is probably really long at this point, so I'm going to cut it off here. Top 8 for a Mox Emerald. Tony Scapone winning the whole tournament, getting us the team prize, and you love to see it. A successful NYSE, seemingly the last NYSE, hopefully not the last event from T.O. Nick. I'm leaving this one here. Everyone, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, check out the Patreon to support the channel, and I'll see you next time.